All right, so here are, we're just going to go through and build my responses for this write-up. So our code, let's run it and see if we can figure out what it does. All right, we have some number of stars. We have 10 correct guesses. We're going to guess a letter. Let's say the letter Q. No, it has to be lowercase. Letter Q. Q is not in the word. 9 incorrect guesses left. Let's guess A. A is in the word. I think it's apple. Wow. All right. So looks like we're playing a word guessing game like Hangman. So the overall purpose of our program, the program is built to play a word guessing game with the player. Pretty simple. Doesn't need to be overly complex. That's the whole goal of our program. The user guesses one letter at a time, and the program tells them whether or not their letter was in the word. There. So, playing a word guessing game. All right, we're going to capture and paste 2 program segments during that we developed. The first is going to show how data has been stored in a list. The second is showing how the data in that list is being used. So there are a few different lists in this program. So we just need to pick one of the lists that is being used. So let's say I want to pick my guess word list. So that is my section of where my code is, or where data is being put into my list. So I'm going to take a screenshot of that section. I'm going to use my snipping tool, which I don't think is going to be visible. Nope. But I'm going to take a screenshot of that area, and I'm going to paste it in here. So I've got my guess word equals an empty list, and then for each letter in my secret word, we're going to append a star to my guess word. Going to fill in all of the data into there, and now we need to see where our guess word is being used. So let's look through. We are using our update guess word. We're using that function to update the values in our guess word. So we're going to say that there, and let's say that we're using this function to update it. So let's snip that as well. I'm going to take a screenshot of my update guessed word. That code segment as well as this function, or the code in that function. So there is where our data in our guess word is being used. Actually, is the data in here being used? It's not. Where it's actually being used is in our print, which is happening where? Where's our print happening? Actually, I don't know if this list is, no, yes it is. This is gonna work. So, data being used, such as creating new data from the existing data or accessing multiple elements of the list as part of fulfilling the program's purpose. So here we're assigning a new value. I suppose when we print, that is when we're accessing multiple values. Yeah, we're accessing multiple values here. We're updating. So that's gonna work. We're gonna continue from here. So the name of the list being used, in this response is guess word. The data in this list represents the letters that have or have not been guessed by the player. If a letter has not been guessed, that position will be filled with an asterisk character. So, describing what it is representing. Each spot is going to represent one of the letters that has or has not yet been guessed. And we're explaining how the selected list manages complexity in our program code by explaining why your program code could not be written or how it could be written differently if we did not use the list. So if the guess word list is reducing the complexity of my code because lists in Python are immutable where strings are not. This means that changing individual elements, in this case characters, within a list is much simpler than with a string. If we used a string, I guess if I used a string, I would need to use slicing and appending. So what we would need to do differently and how it is reducing complexity. There we go. So this list is making it easier for us to use to change individual elements, which is going to make our writing our code much, much easier. All right, 3C. This is about a function. So for section 1, we need to name a student developed procedure that defines the procedure's name and return type if necessary. In Python, we don't have to name the return type. Python's very loosey-goosey about its types, so we don't really care about the return type here. In another language, such as Java, you have to say what type of value will be returned from a function when you declare it. But for Python, it doesn't really matter. We need at least one parameter that has an effect on the functionality of the procedure, and we need to implement an algorithm that uses sequencing, selection, and iteration. So if we look at our code, we are defining 1, 2, 3 different functions in this code. Now, based on these criteria, one of these does not qualify. We cannot use the getGuess function in section 3C because getGuess does not accept any parameters. Even though we're doing user input within this function, that does not count as a parameter being passed. So getGuess is not a valid function for 3C. So we can either choose update guessed word or bad guesses, but we can't use getGuess. So I'm gonna stick with update guessed word. We're gonna use that function in 3C. So I'm going to snip that as well. I need to include the definition, which is the first line, as well as all of the code inside of that function. So there is our function, update guessed word. We have 3 parameters, so we have at least 1, so that's good. We have sequencing, selection, and iteration. Things are happening in order. And then we have selection, that's our if statement. We have iteration, that's our for loop. So we are meeting all those criteria. The second program code segment must show where your student-developed procedure is being called. We actually already included that in a previous answer, but hey, we have to include it in both locales. So I'm going to snip that as well, where we are calling our update guessed word. Actually, I'm going to include a little bit more here. So that we can get a better idea of when exactly it's being called. So if the letter we guessed is in the secret word, say it's in the word, and update our guessed word. So what does our identified procedure do, and how does it contribute to the overall functionality of the program? The update guessed word function is used to update the asterisk characters in the guess word list. This allows the user to see which position or positions the letter that they guessed is present in the secret word. So we are using this to update the asterisk characters, and this allows the user to see which positions the letter they guessed is present in the secret word. That seems like a pretty good explanation of what the function does in general. We don't need to explain how it works. We just need to say, what does it do? In section 4, this is where we explain how it works. So our function, we're accepting our secret word, we're accepting our guess word, and we're accepting our guess. So our the update guessed word function accepts the secret word, the guess word list, and the letter that was guessed as parameters. For each of the letters in the secret word, our program checks if that letter matches the letter that was guessed. If they match, the guess word is updated at the current index to hold that letter. If they don't match, nothing happens. So we're saying for each of the letters, we can even make this a little bit more clear. The program loops over each of the letters in the secret word and checks if that letter matches the letter that was guessed. So we are exemplifying iteration. We're saying that we're using a loop. We're looping over each of the letters, and we're checking if it matches. So we're showing that we're making a choice. And then if they do match, the guess word is updated at the current index. If they don't match, nothing happens. After the loop is over, the function has finished. So just saying, once the loop is finished, the whole function is done. We are done with that program, with that algorithm. So there we have it. There is our description of how our algorithm is working. Now, you don't have to describe both of the functions, as long as you are describing one of the two functions in this code that was that fit the criteria, you're good. Now, also, your program, when you make it, it might only have one function. You might have several functions that meet these criteria. As long as you are describing one function and one list in sections 2 and 3, you're all good. So you don't need to explain every single one that you're using. You only need to explain one each. All right, and then 3D, we are testing that we know how to, or we're proving that we know how to test our update guessed word function. So in both of our calls, we're going to call update guessed word with some parameters. So first, let's think, what kind of tests can we do to make sure that our update guessed word function works correctly? So let's see what might happen if the user guesses a letter that's not in the or that's not in the secret word. So our first condition, what happens when the user guesses a letter that isn't in the secret word? So now, if we look at our code, it's not possible to make this call. We're not going to update the secret word unless the letter that they guessed is present. But here, we're just testing, does it work? So kind of detached from how the actual code runs, here we are we're writing a test. So our parameters are secret word, we have our guess word, and we have our G, which is our guessed letter. So in 3D, we're going to replace each of those things with an actual value, with an actual thing that we're going to type in to test some condition. So in this scenario, the condition we're testing, what happens if G is not in secret word? So let's say our secret word is cat. Let's say our guess word is currently just 3 asterisks. We haven't guessed any letters. And our G is the letter O. I'm going to change the font on this. So we update guessed word with the secret word being cat, with there being no guesses already made, and we're guessing the letter O. We're seeing what happens when the user guesses a letter not in the word. Now, what should happen in this scenario? If we read through our code, letter is never going to equal guess, so guess word at I is never going to change. So what we can say is the guess word list would not be updated in this scenario because the letter that was guessed is not present in the secret word. And there we go. Now let's think of a second condition. what could we test in a second condition? Well, let's see what might happen if all of the letters in the secret word are the letter that we guessed. What happens when all of the letters in the secret word match the letter the letter that was guessed? So our secret word, we're going to type in some string here. Let's say our secret word is AAA. Our guess word, I'm just going to copy this. Let's say that it starts, that we haven't guessed anything. And let's say that the user guessed the letter A. What is going to happen as a result of this call? Here, that letter equals guess, that's going to be true every time through the loop. So we're going to update our guessed word list so that every element equals the letter A. So the result here, the guess word list will be updated so that every element matches every element equals the letter A, since the guessed letter matches every letter in the secret word. So our function doesn't return anything. All that we're doing is updating a list. So our result is going to be either an update or not an update. So do those two different conditions that we're checking make sense? Does that idea of checking conditions make sense? If you have literally any questions at all about what these questions are asking, how we can come up with conditions, any of this stuff, please ask now.